I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but Street Sharks is one of those games that sits in gaming and pop culture history like a strange echo from like another timeline. You don't forget it even if you try, you just don't hear about it for years, sometimes decades, and then suddenly it starts appearing again in conversations that feel way more serious than nostalgia usually follows. That's exactly what's happening right now with the rumored Street Sharks Reboot. A project people are talking about it like it might actually be in development in some form rather than just basically wishful thinking. And the interesting part is how quickly the tone around it has actually changed now. This used to be the kind of franchise people joked about when talking about 90s cartoons. Giant mutant shark brothers fighting crime in a hyper-stylized city, built originally to sell toys. Wrapped in that over-the-top Saturday morning energy, it was loud, exaggerated, and completely self-aware in the way only 90s action cartoons could be. But today that exact kind of identity is suddenly valuable again. Not ironic, not outdated, it's just different. And that's why the idea of a Street Sharks game reboot is getting attention in a way nobody really expected. Recent franchise activity has been part of the reason. The IP hasn't been completely dormant, with comics and licensing moves showing that there is still quite interest in keeping the brand alive in some form. That kind of slow revival energy is often how older properties start testing the waters before something bigger happens. And in gaming especially, that pattern has become familiar recently. A dormant franchise starts getting merch again, a comic relaunch appears, a few industry whispers start circling, and suddenly people begin asking the same question. What if this actually becomes a game again? Now, see, with Street Sharks, that question hits differently because the core concept's already built like a game design pitch. Four brothers like the TMNT mutated into shark-human hybrids, each with distinct physical abilities, personalities, and combat styles. A city full of crimes, corruption, and experimental science all gone wrong. That structure is basically ready for modern action gameplay without needing to be rewritten from scratch. The original show, in fact, already had its own internal world logic as well. The Gene Slammer experiments, the mutated enemies, the rival factions, and time travel and future versions of these characters later in the series, it wasn't subtle, it was built for constant escalation. That's something modern games actually thrive on, because today's action titles don't just rely on combat anymore, they rely on identity, movement systems, the character differentiations, environmental interactions, and Street Sharks naturally has all of that baked into its DNA. If you break it down simply, each shark already represents gameplay archetype. One is strength, another one's speed, another one's agility and style, and one is heavy impact and just raw power. That kind of structure translates cleanly into a co-op game, especially in a modern engine where movement and combat systems can be heavily differentiated without losing balance. That's where the biggest potential of a reboot really sits with this franchise, not just in nostalgia, but in gameplay clarity. The idea of just four players moving through a stylized urban environment, each controlling a distinct shark, already creates a natural rhythm. Combat could shift between coordinated group fights and chaotic free-flow encounters depending on how the players engage. The city itself, could be designed around fast traversal with rooftops, underground labs, industrial zones, and coastal areas, all feeding into different mission types. And importantly, this world doesn't need realism, it just needs attitude. That's something modern gaming sometimes forgets. Not every game has to be grounded or photorealistic. Some worlds just work better when they fully commit to their own exaggeration. Street Sharks is exactly that kind of universe. Giant mutated sharks breaking through walls, enemies with absurd experimental designs, science fiction that leans more into stylized action than strict logic. If a reboot happens, that's the direction it has to embrace. There's also a strong argument that the tone could shift slightly darker than the original cartoon, without losing its personality, of course. See, the original premise already had a built-in emotional angle. Humans transformed into something else against their will, struggling with identity while still fighting for justice. Which, that alone gives the story more weight than people usually associate with the franchise. A modern interpretation could lean into that balance much more. Not grim, not more grounded emotionally. The brothers wouldn't just be crime fighters, they could also be characters dealing with their own, what they've become. That adds depth to what would otherwise be a straightforward action concept, and it gives players a reason to stay invested beyond the combat. And of course, there's also the city itself. Modern hardware could allow a Street Sharks game to build a dense, reactive environment that feels alive and motion. That wouldn't just be the backdrop, it would be part of the gameplay loop. Enemies could emerge dynamically from different layers of the city, police forces, mutated creatures, corporate security units, underground factions, all reacting to player movement in different ways depending on the situation. That kind of layered design fits perfectly with the franchise that has always leaned into chaos. And honestly, co-op would probably be the strongest foundation for the whole thing. That's right, Street Sharks was never meant to feel solitary. It's built around brotherhood. Even in the original show, the dynamic between sharks was central to everything. They argued, they joked, fought together, and ultimately functioned as a unit, even when things got chaotic. That kind of energy translates naturally into multiplayer gameplay. Drop in co-op, shared missions, character-specific abilities that matter in group encounters, that's where the game would really find its identity. Visually, the style also matters more than realism. A modern reboot we think should not try to turn Street Sharks into something grounded or muted. It should embrace bold silhouettes, strong colors, exaggerated movements, and comic book style presentation. And that's something modern audiences actually respond to now. Games that look different, games that commit fully into their aesthetic instead of blending into everything else. That's why the idea of Reboot keeps gaining traction recently. Of course, nothing is officially confirmed for this franchise in a way that guarantees production details and release timelines right now. Like many revived franchises, most of what exists right now is discussion, licensing activity, and industry speculation rather than hard announcements right now. But that pattern is familiar enough that people are giving or paying attention. Because when a property like this starts reappearing in modern conversations, it usually means something is being tested behind the scenes. And whether that actually leads to a full game or not, the interesting part is how naturally Street Sharks fits into today's gaming landscape. The fast combat, the strong character identity, the co-op gameplay potential, stylized world design, it doesn't feel like a forced adaptation, it feels like something that was just waiting for the right era of technology to catch up to it. And if that moment really does arrive, it won't just be a nostalgia revival, it'll be a full reinterpretation of one of the most iconic, strange and oddly perfect action concepts from the 90s. Built again, but this time with the scale it always really deserved.